Thank you, Louise. This is David Good. Renee and Kay and Stian and I, the only thing that changed is we got older and fatter. And we wear masks from time to time, except for Stian, of course. But the invasives are still running wild, and that's a concerning thing. I call, all the investment time, and if you look at the environment, we're losing the battle for various reasons. So what I'm going to introduce to you is the Greater Cape Town Water Fund, and from the outset, it's a public-private partnership, and I can't see behind the masks, but I'm 100% sure that many of the people that's part of this initiative may be in this room. So I'm going to just briefly give you a background on the Greater Cape Town Water Fund, the case that Renee referred to, and talk about private-public partnership in action. So first of all, what is a water fund? Now, not everybody liked the word, but that's where it started in 2000 in the city of Quito in Ecuador, and it was called the Water Fund, and it still carries that name. We now talk about catchment investment programs. Whatever we call it, it's a public-private partnership, where downstream water users pay for upstream restoration, because where we focus, or water funds focus, is upstream from dams, so it's catchments, it's not downstream. And it's also, and the downstream beneficiaries are often municipalities, it's often corporates, industry, farmers, depending on landscape, so it's always different. Although it's important to say what a water fund is, it's also very important to say what it is not. It is not taking over government's role. So the stuff that Stian is talking about, the government's mandate, it's not taking that over. Secondly, it's not competing with existing initiatives, and it's not duplicating. So it's more catalytic, bring value, and when we explore where a water fund can work, and go there on invitation. So water funds go through the life cycle, it's scientifically based, it's very strong stakeholder engagement, especially in the beginning, because without the key stakeholders in a landscape, the water fund won't work. So it's very stakeholder orientated, and then initially we do a pre-feasibility study to see if a water fund can work the model can work in a landscape. Then we do a feasibility study, which is the science, and I'll talk a bit more about the Cape Town example. Then we establish the water fund, we mature it, and what the Nature Conservancy does is we do not establish water funds and stay in the landscape. We establish a water fund, build local capacity, and then we exit. And this is what that's also the lifespan of the Greater Cape Town Water Fund. Then it splits off as a separate entity. But when we do that, that separate entity must be financially sustainable, stakeholder involved, must be involved, and it must show demonstration in a landscape. So we based the example on multiple, more than 40 water funds globally. As I said, the first one was in Quito in Ecuador. Then there are 9 water funds just in Brazil. And from this map you can see we in multiple places globally. So it's a blueprint that we're following. No 2 water funds are the same because it speaks to the local conditions. And this is just to show where in Africa we're working, bringing it closer to home. And if you look at the bottom in South Africa, we're exploring water fund models for multiple landscapes. So let's go to the Greater Cape Town Water Fund that's applicable and that's relevant to this group. So the Greater Cape Town Water Fund derives its name from, it's not Cape Town, it's not Table Mountain, because Cape Town, Stellenbosch, and other municipalities and the agricultural sector gets their water from the mountains outside Cape Town, from the Western Cape Water Supply System, which is an integrated system that I think many of you are familiar with. Let's turn the clock back to 2018, when we were facing day 0, we were showering in buckets, We were facing a day that the Verkeerwaterproof dam would reach 13% and Cape Town would switch to day zero, where people had to queue for their water. And there was anxiety. I think many of you, if not all of you, were part of that 2018. Nobody is 3 years old here, so I'm sure you were all part of it. So we were all very nervous. Agriculture sector was hit hard. A lot of job losses, tourism. And I was in a forum in Cape Town where a businessman stood up, the water and sanitation, the National Department gave to city talking about the potential of day zero. And the businessman stood up and I could see the desperation saying this could not happen in Cape Town. And this, what happened in 2018, will repeat itself in the future. The predictions are there. If we look at our dams now and we see the water, we're not out of the woods, and we'll talk a bit about why. When Cape Town planned years ago to, because Cape Town is a water services provider like Stellenbosch, the municipality is responsible for keeping the taps open. So they looked at options what a municipality can do, and that is improve water use, prevent leakages, and then also considered Table Aquifer drilling and desalination, but it was never as urgent as 2018. When day zero closed in, the city started looking at emergency measures. While this was all playing out, the 2/3 of the catchments are invaded by alien plants. And I'm now not talking only the things that we can see, I'm talking about where we cannot see. And the main culprit is pines, because pines have the seeds are dispersed by winds. And we have plantations in this area. And and southeaster. So if that seed blows up into the mountain, it can establish a plantation. It can happen, and that's a wild plantation. And Steve spoke about the fire and damages caused by alien vegetation. So you will recall I mentioned that feasibility study where we're talking about the science. Now, it's also many people maybe in this room who CSI are working for water, Stellenbosch University, the Center for Invasion Biology, and multiple people, scientists, warn that we're losing water, we're losing biodiversity, and the case was there. But what wasn't there is the focus and the quantification. So we worked with the exact same scientists. We say, where should we focus where we can get the highest and the quickest return on investment? And we're focusing, we looked at the entire Western Cape water supply system, and not me, Anchor, Jane Kirby, they did the study, National Conservancy and partners commissioned that. Right from the start, we entered into the MOU with the City of Cape Town and brought other government, WWF and others on board to say, we've got a problem here, how can we collectively sort this out? So the study has shown that at the stage when we did it, which was 2018, we're losing 55 billion litres of water every year as a result of alien trees in just about, 76% of the catchment we're losing the 55 billion litres of water, so it's not the entire catchment even. So if we don't do anything about the problem, or business as usual, the water losses will double within 20 years. So for a city and a region that faced the day zero, we cannot afford this. So one of the reasons, and there's a long history of clearing invasions. Since 1990, or before 95, Cape Nature worked had teams that kept the mountains, or tried to keep the mountains clear of aliens. And then the Working for Water program started. Many private landowners, municipalities are trying. But we don't make headway. Brian van Wilgen and others did a study to show, in 2012 it was released, that showed we're losing the battle, we're not winning. Despite billions of rands and multiple efforts. And there's multiple reasons for that. One is funding. We over-rely on working for water. Everybody relies on working for water. Working for Water work countrywide, and they have budget cuts and all sorts of things. Inconsistency in funding. 1 year you get R1 million, next year you get R2. Insufficient funding. It's not enough to address the problem and address it at scale. There's also an unclear cost benefit, because if you want the downstream, and this is where the water fund comes in, if you want the downstream user to pay for upstream restoration, you've got to understand the benefit. Bureaucracy, stop-start, the government wheels turn very slow. Implementation is fragmented, everybody on their own little island, we never work together. Lack of priority and focus. There's plans, but there's no focus, very little focus and little priority. Clear areas are not maintained, especially after fires, and we couldn't access the working at the scale we need to the high altitude areas, the areas that we can't see. And there's an absence of clear strategy. There's no monitoring evaluation, and we lack flexibility. And these are some of the reasons that were identified by stakeholders why we're not making headway. And the picture that you see there on the left is where we can't see, and that's where the invasives grow. And this is the areas, unless we focus there, integrating different control methods, which I know others will talk about later today, we won't win the battle. So then I'm going to talk a bit about the business case. So in 2018, when it was very dry, we did science. The business case was released in November, and it gave, you can't talk to a city engineer and say, cut down a few trees up in the catchment and you can't even see there will be water in the taps. The city's responsibility, or the water services providers, municipalities, are responsible to make sure that the water comes out of the tap. If they don't do it, people get very angry and very unhappy with it. So we engaged the city of Cape Town, but we didn't do it at the scale that we would have, because they were concerned about day zero. So then we looked at the 7 priorities that I mentioned before, and we ranked them 1 to 7 in terms of highest priority, where we can get the quickest water, and it's about the Berg River Dam. The 2 highest priority sub-catchments is what we call the Upper Berg and the Volvo Grove. If we focus there, we could get the quickest return on investment. So then we looked at different scenarios, do nothing, business as usual, the current status, and the current status was when the water fund already started kicking off, people start working together, and full implementation is the future. So the current status is where the water fund is now in its life cycle. So then what we did is we took hydrological models and looked at the scenarios of the invasion, the impact of the invasion if it increases in our area, what the impacts on water would be, and then if you turn it around and you look at removing the invasives, what the impact will be. So hydrological models inform the business plan. Then we also look at who cares, who's the biggest user and what the biggest benefit. So it's from the different dams, and it's municipalities, agricultural sector. The city of Cape Town is the biggest user, then agriculture, and then the smaller municipalities. These are the downstream users that I'm talking about that's benefiting from clearing invasives in the catchment. Then we took a long-term view, because all of us know that there's no short-term quick fix. So we have a high-impact period, and the question, that high-impact period was informed of what's practical. It's very ambitious. We need to clear 54,500 hectares of invasive trees in 7 priority areas to reclaim 55 million litres of water every year. And then we've got to maintain it. So the high impact phase, the blue, is the high cost and high impact, but maintaining it is over the next 24 years. And the dotted line that you see there is the water benefits that increase while the costs come down, providing we maintain it. So where do we get the money from, and how do we actually do the work? So we're in that high impact phase now, we're in year 3. So then we also look at what's the avoided cost? As I mentioned, the City of Cape Town considered multiple options to avoid the taps from running down. And there were predictions that Cape Town would run out of water in 2021. Where are we? 2021. Why do we say we will run out of water? Because the dams are over-allocated. There's more demand than water in the dams. So when you look at the dams, bless their souls, there's not enough water for us. If we don't get that summer trickle, and if we don't take the water thieves out of the catchments, Cape Town will run out of water, and the region will suffer. So will agriculture and the smaller municipalities. So it also the value of the water, we compare it with the one that it's most comparable with desalination, and it proves return on investment of 350%. And this is a no-brainer. So we use this information in collaboration with the city and the private sector and the scientists to make the case. Then we compared it with the other options, and nature-based solutions not only saves water, it's for water from the dam, treatment included to the tap, it's if you clear invasives, it's R2.20 per cubic meter. Whereas desalination, for example, is 18 Rand, depending on we worked on line rand at the stage. But it's a no-brainer that clearing invasives is much more cost-effective, and it has additional benefits such as biodiversity, improving biodiversity protection, it reduces fires, and it can use it to create jobs. So the funding comes from a blended model. We're using a blended funding model. In the beginning, it was the private sector. The blue is private sector funding. We raised it from corporates, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Caterpillar, Levi Strauss, and philanthropy. And the red, the cherry on top there is the government contribution. So that's the business as usual. So if we continued with the government contribution, you can see we will never win the battle. This is just the 6 years. And then the City of Cape Town last year came and said, we're going to fund, because we are the biggest water user. So the City of Cape Town is funding for 2 years, 50 million Rand. 25 million this year, 25 million next year. But we need to build in a condition there. The City of Cape Town is now paying their due. What are the other municipalities? What is agriculture? What is government going to do? We can raise private sector funding, and the private sector will happily get involved if we get the government's backing and involvement. So we need policy changes. We need to look at where we're using the water resource charges, because catchment management agencies must become part of the solution. As you remember, I said water funds is not there to replace government mandates. So that's where we can start pooling the funding for the 24 years. And unless that happens, we wasted the 6 years. So you can now see the picture looks a bit better, but we need 600 million Rand over 24 years, and we need 372 million Rand over the first 6 years. Period that we're in. And the 70% of the cost is up to the 30-year lifespan cost of the water fund is for the first 6 years. And you saw that the blue bars, so we're now in that blue bar stage. So this is the business case. So we took the business case, we had a collaboration with our partners, and we said, what would the partnership look like when it's in action? So we have a steering committee, and this is the waterfront governance model. It's called, this is the interim arrangement until we, as I said, the new entity spins off as a separate legal entity, hopefully by 2023. So we have a steering committee, and we can immediately say the private sector there is not an imaginary friend. The private sector is on the steering committee. It's about transparency. What do we do with their funding? And say to government, we're coming to the part of where are you? How can we leverage government funding
And the private sector's contribution leveraged the City of Cape Town's buy-in. And now that the City of Cape Town is in, the private sector said, okay, we've got skin in the game here, let's go together. But then what happens in the outer years? And that's what I want to emphasize. We've got a now position for this water fund to keep doing the work for the next 24 years. So the Nature Conservancy is the secretariat, we're the convener, and there's, in addition to the steering committee, there are 3 working groups. The one is the Delta Ops working group, that's the engineering, Cape Nature, City of Cape Town, Working for Water, WWF. These are the City of, I mentioned City of Cape, and they in the working group, and it's not the TNC led. We led them in the beginning. Cape Nature took over, and now Jason Smith from Working on Fire is the chairperson of that. It shows that it's not one swallow that makes the summer, it's a collective. The M&E working group consists of scientists from the Stellenbosch University, Cape Town University, SAION, etc. And we have, I'll talk a bit about the M&E. And then we have this finance working group, and this group needs to help us map the future and raise the funding so that the work can still happen over the next 24 years after these 6 years of high impact. Then we looked at the 7 priorities and we said, okay, who's doing what already? So then we said, okay, let's each of the implementers take responsibility for one of the sub-catchments so that we're not falling over each other's feet. So the Nature Conservancy and the City of Cape Town work together in the Wemmershoek catchment in Steenras. It's not here yet. The Nature Conservancy and the City of Cape Town, that's again the Wemmershoek Dam, working on fire and high altitudes in the Wolverkloof of the Berg River, Cape Nature, the Nature Conservancy, and the Toys, which is one of the sub-catchments of the Tierwaterskloof. And there you can see the Nature Conservancy takes hands with all the partners. We don't work alone in one of the catchments. And then WWF and Working on Fire takes responsibility for the Upper Berg. So now we said, we know what to do, we understand the water losses for each, we understand the cost for each of the catchments. We track the cost, and you can, it's an online, publicly accessible access with the Blow reader, and you can, if you click on that link, you will be able to see where we work, how much we spend, where we still have to work. It's accessible by the public. This is it's about accountability. It's about seeing the progress and seeing a private sector certificate, and anybody can go and say, who funded this, who's working where, what's the plan for the year, and are we making it or not? How close are we to that 55,000 hectares? And this is the tool that the Delta and Ops Working Group used to do the annual plans of operation, go back the next year and see how we've done. And this is the tracking. So it helped with scenarios, it's helped with finances, and it's on the online visual platform that anybody can access. This is just 2 screenshots that I took from the platform. It shows each of the catchments and the progress with each of them, what percentage has been cleared so far. It shows who's working where and who spends what. We also know what funding has been spent, how much it's cost. So what's the progress today? We started in April 2019. We've cleared 21.5 or 21.8 thousand hectares. Initial hectares 18,000 and follow-up 2,800. The follow-up schedule works a slightly different, that you can't go back every year, don't have to go back every year, depends on densities. And that was all predetermined, and we're tracking how well it works or doesn't work. But what is important here, we only use one of the tools in our toolbox, that is mechanical and manual control on pines in the high altitude areas. It's very expensive. It's up to, we're talking about those who are familiar with the person, the hectare cost of working for water. I think it's now, I don't know what's allowable now, but it's around 200 or 250 rand per person day. Some of these person day costs is 1,600 rand per person day. Because people have to be flown in, it's specialized equipment, they camp there for 2 weeks, and then they come out. The missing links, there's 3 missing links. One is biocontrol, which is a very important, cost-effective tool, and unless we get biocontrol on pines, we're not going to win the battle. Second is fire. We should burn areas, but we don't burn it because there's so many burns of wildfires and the resources are stretched. But what we do is we follow up after fires. That's one of the nimbleness or the benefits of this model, because we don't have to move a big ship and point it in a direction. By the time the ship points in the direction of where the fires burn, it's too late. We've got to follow up within a year. Again, depends on density, etc., etc. And then follow up. You can see we are already behind. And multiple reasons play into this, and it's not funding, it's weather. Because we fly people, we couldn't deploy people for almost a month in summer last year. October, November, where we banked on that we can deploy. Winter is almost impossible because it's people's lives, safety, and it's horrific if we don't understand the mountains, if you haven't been there, so book a helicopter trip and go and see. And so far, the benefits is 10 million litres. Now, how do we know that? The models have told us that we're working, we're getting it, and I'll tell you a bit how we monitor it. And 475 green job opportunities, of which 80 people are high angle. We need 150 or 120 high angle technicians to make it. It's almost impossible. So we need those other tools, biocontrol, fire, and herbicides. So monitor impact. What do we monitor? We look at our management effectiveness. We look at how cost effective we work, how efficient the work is. We have looked at biodiversity recovery. Stellenbosch University Centre for Innovation Biology, that's a partnership. They will track how the field recovers. Looking at different scenarios with different control methods. We have 3 catchments where we're looking at, I'll show a bit more about that in the next slide, and then we look at how happy are our partners, because we cannot say it's a partnership unless we check in with our partners and hear how happy they are still. Do they feel, see there's a benefit in this? And the main thing here is it's not static, it's changing. So we've got to check in with our partners regularly. This is not a cast in stone thing. We learn, we make mistakes, but unless we're willing to make those mistakes, partnerships won't work. So what we have, this is just the water benefit. So we said through the models that we used for the business case, we're losing 55 million litres every year. That's 2 months water supply for Cape Town. This is the current state, and that shows an invaded area. This is what the mountains look like. It is an absolute eye-opener. You know, if you go and fly over the catchments, that's the picture that we see. And to clear that with people it takes time, and it's not possible. So that's why I say in this type of areas, integrate fire, biocontrol, and herbicides is the most effective. But what we want to see is by 2025, we want to reclaim 55 million litres. We don't want to track only. We say we're going to do it. We're not saying maybe we won't. I'm saying we won't. But we've got to be brave. We've got to put it out there. And if we don't make it, we've got to go back and say why not. And that's where the transparency comes in. So what we do is we look at a catchment that's invaded. And there's 2 invaded catchments, and there are 1 catchment that's not invaded. And we installed rain meters, data loggers, and we take the readings of the invaded versus the uninvaded. And in the 3 years after we started this monitoring in October 2019, After 3 years, we will clear one of the invaded pairs, and we measure the effect for another 3 years, and then we clear the other one, and we keep the uninvaded catchment clear, and that's where the science comes in. So we can look at how accurate the models were, and we can look at and track the impact directly through this monitoring. So what is, just in closing, what makes this partnership effective? It's not always pain-saving. I'm not saying it's perfect, far from it. But the intention is there. The partners understand that we need to do something differently, and there's a commitment to working together. That's the common ground. There's agreement. The second is co-ownership. Cape Nature does the inspections. And often partnership is like a marriage, you know, if things go well, we're all happy, but when things start going sour, we divorce. We can't necessarily, we don't want to divorce, so we go for counseling. So we've got to share the love and we've got to share the pain. And there's opportunities for interaction. The Cops and Data Working Group has met for every month since 2017 when we established it. Come hell or high water, we've got to talk. We have to create platforms for engagement. Transparency is just key to it. Nobody knows everything. We're not pretending that we've solved all the world's problems, but be transparent around. And have a flexible mindset. Meaningful, effective, enduring, collaborative process. And this is more towards the future. It's fine now because we have the funding, but unless we get the new entity, the new Greater Cape Town Waterfront entity, on solid ground with a blend of government and private sector funding, we're going to waste all the good year, all the good work that we've done today. Innovative. We've got to make new plans. How do we map, for example, these higher altitude areas? We have a product that we call LENS, satellite imagery, and for the first time in my odd years that I've been involved in invasive species management catchments, I feel confident about the product. So we use it before we deploy teams. We look at it. We receive the baseline data from Cape Nature. Then we cost the work. Then we take LENS, the imagery, and we see what the imagery tells us, and especially where we can deploy the team, because some of these areas are under 300 hectares. Need to know where to put the team, they need to be close to water, and then move them, and where to move them. So that cut costs. And then we take the helicopter, fly over, verify, and then we put people on the ground. So it's a multiple verification process. But if we only use helicopters, which is 20,000 rand an hour to map, it's not cost effective. So now this tells us a story over time to see how accurate we are. So that's the innovation and the different methodology, the different follow-up schedules. Monitor, adapt, and that's the benefit of a public-private partnership where government isn't the implementer, but the NGO or the entity will also be the NGO. It's more flexible. Still rules, but more flexible. I really want to acknowledge our partnerships because an initiative like this cannot work without partners, it cannot work without buying, it cannot work without hard conversations, and it cannot work without financial and capacity support. So I'm happy to take questions. I hope I didn't overshoot my time by 1,000 miles.
Thank you, Louise. It's once again, it's amazing for me to see how many pieces of this puzzle at the end of the day there are. We have a question here, gentlemen.
Yes. Louise, my name is Alpha. It's perhaps not your department, but I'm hoping you have an answer. What is the current and long-term status of commercial forestry adjacent or in these critical catchment areas? Because it feels like we're resuscitating a corpse while someone is still continually shooting. Do you know?
I think it's one of our biggest problems. As long as we have the runway or the forestry exit areas that's not being maintained, we still sit with the seed source.
We have, for example, in Gabona also extended the work to Stemras because the City of Cape Town funded and said then they want it to be worked. We need to engage the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. We need to engage the Department of Public Works because there are areas, we are actually hoping to get to the Minister to ask whether we can do fine-scale planning to see where the replanting can happen and where it shouldn't happen, and where it shouldn't happen, we need to clear those areas, hand it over to conservation, otherwise all this work is like spinning our wheels. We sit with the problem in the catchments, in the strategic water source areas, there's commitment, but we need to see action to that commitment. So that's one of our biggest Achilles heels.
Thank you very much.
Question over on the left foot. Just hand it. Go to the left, maybe we'll go back to the right hand side. Just waiting for the mic.
And while I have the mic, I hope, Stian, I'll give you another hand. If we can start engaging forestry or those exit areas through I know there's a challenge with giving directives to another department, but if we can have the power of your law to look at your own, at government, where the problem lies in those areas, that would be,
We started in the Taimon area with the land invasion, you are very directed to forestry land. That is pending now. I think it's an ice cream. It's pending now for us to go forward with forestry, and forestry belongs to us now. So, but we are issuing them on their land the directive to start clearing because of the fire hazard and the land invasion happening there. So we have started that. We do need more negotiation in DG or DG level. Yeah, right.
That's the right way to go. That's the only way to go. Thanks,
Fantastic.
dear.
Gentlemen.
Hi. I just want to draw attention to one aspect that you are neglecting, and that is the management of your cut material from dense stands, particularly in plantations. It is working against all that you're aiming for, in other words, improved biodiversity. It also causes erosion and it leads to flooding of the material downstream. So some research is needed into, or action is needed into removing or handling your cut material, particularly in dense stands. Thank you.
That's an important point. So it's impossible to remove the cut material by helicopter. So we stack it in a certain way. Most two sites are the same. Before we work on the site, we look at the conditions. We don't foul everything. We do ring barking. It's a combination. And we stack it for follow-up, and we stack it for if a fire goes through. It's fine, fortunately, a soft food, so if you do your basics right in the beginning, over time, the restoration will happen. And this is where the Stellenbosch University's research will come in. They will look at recovery and biomass, how that whole operation works with the recovery of the failures. Thank you very much, a very important point.
Okay. We have three gentlemen who go in succession. I think the gentleman there had his hand up first.
Hi, good day. My name is Farouk. I'm with the organization, the National Private Police. My concern is the lower East River. I'm working there. I'm hearing, but whose responsibility is it? Most concentrating on the upper regions. So a lot of basically a lot of flooding in the winter months because of the river being blocked by cuttings that maybe come from upstream, as well as illegal dumping of things in the river. But there's also anything coming in the river. So this responsibility is the cleaning of the alien invasive species in the river and along the floodplains.
It will be a landowner. We, as I said, we work above the dams. City of Cape Town most likely is a private landowners. That's my knowledge of the lower East River, and possibly even Stellenbosch.
Another question there?
Hi, good day, Louise, representing Reds. Louise, your expertise with regards to replicating the water fund in areas where there's not a very strong corporate drive behind it. What can you share with us, for future consideration?
Such an important point. Just the water fund model is a very powerful model, but you need that, especially the upfront investment. One can consider a group of a farmers association, a water use association, who's dependent on the water. And it's not possible to address, especially if you think the massive problem there from private sector or water use association or landowner point of view. That's where you really need government. So it's all site-specific or area-specific. The Overberg is one of the sites that we actually have on our radar and work with Abby in the low project. But it's almost, unless one mobilizes around Abby, the farmers, and the main thing that people are concerned about is how does the money flow? What do we see happening to our money? So if one can generate, if the funding can flow to an entity that's willing to do the administration and to be, trackable, then it can work. But it's a real challenge in the Overberg because the problem is it keeps running away. And that's where I think that if one looks at working for water, for example, one can almost say, let's use this initiative to focus hard on those high catchments. And then where do we move collective? Where does government go next? Because it's also, if we do it right, it also brings costs down. So you need that regional approach, and I think that's where the Department of Environment and we can play a very important role. And technology.
Richard Van Nisselen, I'm a resident in Franschhoek and I do a lot of hiking around those mountains. I can see what is happening behind the Berg River Dam. But if we think about the T-Virus Kloof Dam, which is probably the most important, I would ask you to expand on what's happening along the Toys River, because I don't see much happening there.
Okay, so the principle is the T-Virus is extremely important. It's extremely important for the downstream users to swim in, and it's extremely important for the agricultural sector and the whole region. There's three sub-catchments at the West, the Upper Fish and the Landspoor. So, in the beginning, we moved quite fast. But I always think there's going to be a bottleneck, and we're there now, because it's about the infestation that you saw in that picture, that's the toys. So we're working currently at the upper reaches of the Amandels River that comes in at that farm, to the Amandel River. We're also working in upper Ditways. So the progress that you see now is a bit slow. If you go past Neerwaters and you look up to the mountain, you will start seeing the difference because we moved from the top to the bottom. And we also have a different approach. You can't just get stuck in with those dense areas. You've got to alter it with less dense things. So it's a whole, it's a really well thought through approach. But I totally agree that T-Virus is very important. And we've raised 100 million rand so far. And we still need 218 million rand to reach our target for the 5 years. And that's where the blended financing comes in, mostly from the private sector. City of Cape Town came on board. They want to clear the Wemmershoek, so we moved the private sector funding to the Twice Wemmershoek. And they cleared Upperberg and above Berg River Dam and Steenbras. So the private sector and Cape Nature are clearing the catchments of the T-Virus. But a very big point, and I really hope that in 5 years when Andre and Steen and Kay organize the next meeting, I want to be invited because I want to show pictures of the clear T-Virus Kloof catchments. If we don't do it, I'll find a high building and jump off because then we haven't done our jobs.
Last question, gentlemen, over here for Louise.
Thank you. I'd just like to leave a thought. Clearly, the more focus of this fund is the increase of water. Now, the second and much more important one could argue element would be increasing biodiversity that comes with the process. If one has that focus, then increasing our biodiversity, our incredible biodiversity, in an area like the Kugelberg Biosphere Reserve, which is now coming up for its 25th anniversary, funding from an international level will surely be possible. I'm thinking of UNESCO, the Global Environmental Facility. You may recall the Old Cape project, which was entirely funded in the Botanical Society days that I was involved by the Global Environmental Facility. Isn't that the route to go? Really focus on biodiversity benefits and get international funding. Just a thought.
Biodiversity is part of it. We are focusing on restoration. We're not clearing areas. It's about restoring natural ecosystems and rainbows. That's where Stellenbosch University will track how well we're doing on it. Waterwork is included in the Greater Cape Town Waterfront because City of Cape Town gave funding for Steendraad, and that's where the forest exit areas are so important. And WWF and GUA, Not Water Use Association, and the Waterberg Biosphere Reserve Company, very active there. And we see that almost through the same lens as the greater Cape Town Waterfront because they're in that same system. So I mentioned the other benefits, reduction in fires, a recovery of biodiversity. So very important, and I'm happy to just say we're not an orienteering program. It's about restoring biodiversity.